Hi, I'm Kristen Anderson. My pronouns are she, her. This is the Ashland Library, and this is the new edition of Read This. And today we are going to talk about coziness. I think staff has had the feeling that going through Halloween and like really spooky books, but also just kind of the world and the way it is right now, that everyone needed a moment to just reflect on cozy books. And cozy books have been really hot recently. And if cozy isn't something that you are familiar with in the context of books, it is most usually used when talking about mysteries. And if you have been paying attention, there was recently a mystery fest in Ashland. Ashland is actually the setting for a cozy mystery series by Ellie Alexander. And Ellie worked hard with the Ashland Chamber of Commerce to come up with this concept of this amazing mystery fest where people who are fans of cozies come to Ashland and get to kind of celebrate their love of cozies with other people who also love cozies. And if you didn't get to see that this year, it'll be back next year about this time. Fall is a great time for cozy. So you mostly hear about it when you talk about mystery. But recently, we've seen a lot of cozy coming out in sci-fi and fantasy. So I wanted to run through a couple of different, actually more than a couple, titles and kind of genres and where things cross over. And I'm not going to talk about romance, but romance falls firmly in the cozy realm as well, because romance has a guaranteed happily ever after or happy for now ending. If it doesn't have one of those things, it's not actually a romance, though it's a requirement. And when people get stressed out, I've noticed over time, because I've been doing this for a while, cozy is more popular, just in a big macro wave. And that's where we are right now. So I wanted to start, because a lot of people who watch this are big readers, with an area of cozy that people might not be aware of. There's actually a subgenre in Japanese fiction called Japanese comfort fiction. And there's one that came out this year, which is Will Prescribe You a Cat by Sue Ishida. And that's been recently released in translation, but was a huge bestseller in Japan. That is basically a book about cats solving people's life problems, like not big macro life problems, but like, you know, your relationships with your friends and your family, or, you know, smaller, lower stakes situational things that can be high stakes for the person, but not like big stakes in the larger picture of things. And it is also one that there's a series called Before the Coffee Gets Cold, and that's by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. And that is kind of a magical realism / fantasy, where folks show up at a coffee shop. They know this coffee shop exists. You can go back in time, but only within the coffee shop. So the other person has to be in the coffee shop too. And you can only stay in the future or in the past for as long as your coffee is hot. And it has some really comforting resolutions to kind of smaller problems, not always the way you would expect, but it's considered a comforting read. And there's multiple installments in that series at that point. Another new one this year, this one's out of South Korea, not Japan. Welcome to Hyunam-dong Bookshop by Porum Hwang. And actually, I got that backwards. It's Hwang Borum. And it is kind of a similar realism, small problems getting fixed in kind of cozy ways, that is part of a wave of fiction that's coming to us in translation out of Asia. But you also see this kind of surge in fantasy that is cozy. And one of the early ones that came out that I think I've talked about before is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. Its subtitle is a novel of high fantasy and low stakes. So you've got kind of the main character is kind of who has been kind of the muscle in a fantasy kind of quest group, who has decided that she's done with being the muscle in a fantasy quest group and opens a coffee shop in a small town and has creates a life for herself that is completely separate from anything related to questing and swinging swords and things like that. Another subset in your cozy fantasy, kind of, it feels a little bit more like it's closer to our own world, but it isn't really our own world, is The House in the Cerulean Sea. So it's kind of in between high and low fantasy, by T.J. Klune. And that is a man who's kind of running a foster home for magical children, and is kind of a metaphor for queerness and queer identities. And there's a romance associated with it, and there is a brand new sequel to that just came out this year called Somewhere Beyond the Sea. Another one that feels very like Legends and Lattes is Can't Spell Treason Without Tea, a cozy fantasy steeped with love. And that's by Rebecca Thorne. And then you get additional crossover genres. So here's one where you've got cozy, fantasy, mystery. And I've got a couple of those. The Witness for the Dead by Catherine Addison, which is the beginning of a series about the main character is in the fantasy world, a witness for the dead, and what he's able to do is hear the voice of someone after they've died. Makes him an excellent potential solver of murder mysteries, and that is a really fun series that has 2 installments and will have an additional one, I think, in the new year. And another new one is The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett, which is more of a Watson Holmes dynamic, but in a fantasy world. And then I skipped over these when I was talking about the more purely fantasy cozies, but The Spell Shop by Sarah Beth Durst and I'm Afraid You've Got Dragons by Peter S. Beagle. Both have very cozy feeling, but high fantasy stories. And then you get into more contemporary stuff. How to Age Disgracefully by Claire Pooley just came out. It's about a group of people led by a retired woman with kind of a mysterious background who are trying to save their community center in a small town in England. And it's the senior... It's the group of seniors and the daycare and the Alcoholics Anonymous group and there's a few other the antenatal classes. It's in the UK, so they're antenatal classes, not prenatal classes, and it's very heartwarming and cozy. Another element that I think is important to recognize in these cozy books is often there's humor involved, and this definitely leans on the humor. Another one that leans on humor, also set in England, this one's more of a mystery. The new Richard Osman, We Solve Murders, is a new, he wrote Thursday Murder Club, if you're familiar. This is the start of a new series. It's going to be kind of a father-daughter pair. He's actually her father-in-law, but kind of eccentric, very, very famous author who has had a big, long life, and they are going to, and she's kind of the money behind their murder solving, but they're going to solve murders together, and it should be really fun. The first one was great. Another one where I think of humor, this is historical cozy mystery, A Curious Beginning, which is the first installment of the Veronica Speedwell series, which is a Victorian lepidopterist and her taxidermist love interest trying to create a museum together and solving mysteries on the side. It's delightful. Another thing I think about with cozy is like familiar stuff. And for me, familiar stuff looks an awful lot like Jane Austen fan fiction. And there is a historical cozy mystery series that's newer called the Mr. Darcy and Miss Tilney Mysteries. The first installment is The Murder of Mr. Wickham. Yes, that Mr. Wickham. It's all the characters from all the Jane Austen books getting together at a house party. Mr. Wickham shows up, he dies, and everybody has a motive to kill Mr. Wickham. And it's now a 3-installment series. And the most recent one is Lady Catherine de Bourgh. So those are all fun. You can also find cozy sci-fi, lots of Becky Chambers books. The first installment of Monk and Robot is called A Psalm for the Wild Built. The first installment of The Wayfarers is called The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, which feels a little bit like the TV show Firefly. And one last weird subcategory before we get to true cozy, and I'm really going long, so I'm going to jump through these really quickly. There's this cute cozy time travel category that tends to be like historians / academics doing time travel. And you've got 3 different examples of that. There's a Doomsday Book, which is an older title by Connie Willis. You've got The Rise and Fall of Dodo by Neil Stevenson and Nicole Galland. They wrote that together. And then there's the Chronicles of St. Mary series called, the first one is called Just One Damn Thing After Another by Jodi Taylor. Those are all super fun. And when I was thinking about traditional cozy mysteries, including the one set in Ashland, I went to our expert on cozy mysteries, who is our director, Carrie May, and her favorites that she rattled off first thing were Meet Your Baker by Ellie Alexander. That's the one set in Ashland. You've also got Gigi Pandian, and one of her series starts with Under Lock and Skeleton Key. You've got a bibliophile mystery series by Kate Carlisle called Homicide in Hardcover, and Death by Darjeeling, which is the first in the Tea Shop mystery series by Laura Childs. And hopefully in all of that coziness, there is something that would make you feel cozy and happy this season when we all need a little bit of calming joy and relaxation. And I hope you find that here on this list or somewhere else in your life. And thank you for watching, and we'll see you next month.